Oakwood, Michigan, 2017. The last day of school before Thanksgiving break had been unseasonably warm, the November sun offering a final reprieve before winter descended on the small Midwestern town. 12-year-old Tyler Hayes had stayed late for basketball practice, calling his mother afterward to let her know he was walking home. "It's only 8 blocks, Mom," he'd said, his voice crackling slightly over connection. "Jake and Chris already left. I'll be home in 20 minutes. Melissa Hayes reluctantly agreed, glancing at the clock, 3:45 p.m. Her son would be home well before dark, and Oakwood was known for its safety. She had dinner prepared anyway. Her husband, Mark, was bringing home his boss for an impromptu meal, part of his campaign for a promotion at the engineering firm where he worked. At 4:15 p.m., she looked up from chopping vegetables, realizing Tyler should have arrived by now. She called his cell phone. No answer. At 4:30, she called again, straight to voicemail. By 4:45, she was in her car, driving the route from Oakwood Middle School to their home on Maple Street. There was no sign of Tyler. Not on the main road, not on the shortcut through Pinewood Park that he sometimes took. Panic rising. She called her husband, then the parents of Tyler's friends, then the school. Nobody had seen him after he left the gymnasium at 3:50. By nightfall, the Hayes living room had transformed into a command center. Mark's dinner with his boss forgotten, police officers taking statements, neighbors organizing search parties. Tyler's photo, a smiling boy with sandy brown hair, freckles, and bright green eyes, was printed and distributed. His basketball coach confirmed Tyler had left the school alone, but in good spirits, his navy blue backpack slung over one shoulder. He was wearing jeans, a red and black plaid shirt, and his gray hoodie, Melissa told the officers, her voice mechanical as shock set in, and his white Nike sneakers with a blue swoosh, the ones he saved up for all summer. As flashlights swept across Pinewood Park and police dogs sniffed at the boy's belongings, the first 48 hours, those critical hours in a missing person case, began to tick away. No witnesses came forward. No evidence was found. No ransom calls were received. Tyler Hayes had vanished somewhere along those 8 ordinary blocks in a town where everyone thought they were safe. If stories like this one matter to you, take a second to support this channel. Hit the like button and subscribe to Gone Cold Now. Every week, we cover real cases that deserve to be remembered, and your support helps keep these stories alive. Detective Samantha Morris had been with Oakwood Police Department for 15 years, but missing children cases never got easier. She'd been assigned as lead investigator on the Hayes case, and for the first month, she'd barely slept, pursuing every possible lead. They'd investigated known sex offenders in the area. They'd checked security camera footage from nearby businesses, finding grainy images of Tyler walking past a hardware store on Main Street at 3:58 p.m., but losing him after that. They'd interviewed his friends, teachers, neighbors, and family members multiple times. They'd explored theories ranging from runaway to abduction to, though they were careful not to say this to the parents, homicide. Nothing solid emerged. Tyler had been a normal, well-adjusted 12-year-old with good grades, a passion for basketball, and no apparent secrets or troubles. His cell phone was never found, never used again after his last call to his mother. His social media accounts, limited as they were for a boy his age, showed nothing unusual. 6 months after the disappearance, the active investigation began to slow. Detective Morris was assigned to new cases, though she kept the Hayes file on her desk, returning to it whenever she had spare time. The community rallies dwindled from hundreds of participants to dozens. The media moved on to fresher tragedies. But Melissa and Mark Hayes could move on. Their marriage, already strained before Tyler's disappearance, fractured under the weight of grief and unspoken blame. Mark threw himself into work, while Melissa devoted herself entirely to finding their son, maintaining a website, organizing searches, consulting psychics, and appearing on any true crime show that would feature Tyler's case. "Someone knows something" became her mantra in every interview. Someone saw something that day. As the 1-year anniversary approached, Melissa organized a memorial walk along the route Tyler should have taken home. Hundreds of people attended, carrying candles and wearing T-shirts with Tyler's face printed on them. Detective Morris walked silently beside the Hayes family, noting how much older they looked after just 1 year. Mark's hair had grayed significantly, and Melissa had lost an alarming amount of weight. "We're not giving up," Morris assured them after the walk. "Cold cases get solved all the time. Sometimes it takes years, but we'll find out what happened to Tyler." What she didn't tell them was how rarely children who remained missing for over a year were found alive. Instead, she watched as they released 13 lanterns into the darkening sky, one for each year of Tyler's life. By the second anniversary, Mark had moved out. By the third, their divorce was finalized. By the fourth, the annual memorial walk attracted only a handful of participants. By the fifth, Melissa had moved to a smaller house. Tyler's bedroom recreated exactly as it had been, a shrine to the boy who never came home. Chapter 3. The Backpack, Oakwood, Michigan, 2023. Eleanor Winters was not an early riser by nature, but her new rescue dog, Baxter, had other ideas. At 6:30 a.m. on a crisp October morning, Eleanor found herself on her front porch in her bathrobe, blearily watching the enthusiastic retriever mix explore the yard while she waited for the coffee to brew. She had moved to Oakwood just 2 months prior, taking a position as a librarian at the high school after spending most of her career in Detroit. At 42, the slower pace of small-town life had appealed to her, as had the charming Victorian house on Sycamore Street that she'd managed to afford thanks to the surprisingly reasonable real estate prices. Sipping her coffee, she watched as Baxter suddenly focused on something by the porch steps, his tail wagging uncertainly. Setting her mug down, Eleanor descended the 3 wooden steps to investigate. There, partially hidden by her hydrangea bushes, was a backpack, navy blue, weathered and dirty, as if it had been exposed to the elements for a long time, though not 6 years' worth of weather. Someone had placed it there recently. "What in the world?" she murmured, crouching down. The backpack was zippered shut, and something about it made Eleanor hesitate to touch it. Instead, she called to Baxter, bringing him back inside the house before grabbing her phone and, after a moment's consideration, calling the police. "It's probably nothing," she told the dispatcher, feeling slightly foolish. "But it seems strange that someone would leave a backpack on my porch overnight. I'm new to town, so I don't know many people yet." 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up in front of her house. The officer who approached was a woman in her 40s with short-cropped brown hair streaked with gray. Her badge identified her as Detective Morris. "Ms. Winters? I'm Detective Samantha Morris," she introduced herself. "You found something on your property this morning?" Eleanor led her to the backpack, which remained untouched by the hydrangeas. "It wasn't here when I got home from work yesterday evening, around 6 p.m., so it must have been left overnight." Detective Morris's expression changed subtly as she studied the backpack. Without touching it, she crouched down for a closer look, then stood and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to need to call this in," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Would you mind going back inside for now? And please don't post about this on social media." Confused but cooperative, Eleanor retreated to her porch, watching as the detective made a call and then took photos of the backpack from multiple angles. Within 15 minutes, more police vehicles arrived, including an unmarked car from which emerged a man with a silver evidence collection kit. Eleanor observed from her window as they carefully documented and collected the backpack, placing it in an evidence bag. Something about the officer's demeanor, the reverent way they handled the item, the grim expressions, the hushed conversations, told her this was a routine investigation. When Detective Morris finally came to her door, her face was pale beneath her professional composure. "Ms. Winters, I need to ask you some questions about this morning, and I'd like you to come down to the station if possible." "What's going on?" Eleanor asked. "Whose backpack is that?" The detective hesitated for a moment before answering. "We believe it belonged to Tyler Hayes, a boy who disappeared from this town 6 years ago while walking home from school, and we need to figure out why it just appeared on your porch. Boy vanished after walking home. 6 years later, his backpack appears on a stranger's porch." Chapter 4. Contents and questions the Oakwood Police Department hummed with an energy it hadn't seen in years. Detective Morris had commandeered the conference room, where the navy blue backpack now sat on a white evidence sheet, surrounded by investigators in gloves and masks. Melissa Hayes stood in the corner, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. "It's his," she confirmed immediately. "That's Tyler's backpack. Those are the basketball stickers he put on the front pocket. That's the keychain his father gave him hanging from the zipper." The forensics team worked methodically, photographing the exterior before carefully unzipping the main compartment. Inside, they found items preserved in a state of suspended animation: a math textbook, a spiral notebook with Tyler Hayes Science written on the cover, a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, a Minnesota Timberwolves cap, Tyler's favorite team, and a small case containing his EpiPen for his peanut allergy. In the front pocket, a wallet with $12 in singles and a school ID card, a set of house keys, and a folded piece of notebook paper. When unfolded, it revealed a crude map drawn in pencil, showing what appeared to be directions to a location in what could be Pinewood Park, marked with an X and the words "Meet here 4:15. "He was supposed to come straight home," Melissa whispered, staring at the map. Who was he meeting? Morris exchanged glances with her colleague, Detective Powell. Tyler's friends all said they didn't have plans with him that afternoon. We interviewed them repeatedly. "Well, someone is lying," Melissa's voice hardened, "and I want to know who." Meanwhile, Eleanor Winters sat in an interview room, describing her morning discovery for the third time to a patient but persistent officer. "I've only lived here 2 months, she explained again. "I don't know anyone connected to the Hayes case. I'm not even sure I'd heard about it before today. And you didn't see or hear anything unusual during the night? No cars stopping, no footsteps on your porch?" "No, but I'm a heavy sleeper. And Baxter, my dog, he didn't bark, which is unusual. He alerts me to delivery people, even the mail carrier." This detail caught the officer's attention. So whoever placed a backpack there either knew how to approach without triggering your dog's response, or Baxter knew them. Eleanor finished, the implication landing heavily between them. Later that day, as forensic technicians combed through her front yard and porch for evidence, Eleanor found herself sitting across from Detective Morris at her kitchen table. "Tell me about your move to Oakwood," Morris prompted. "What brought you here specifically?" Eleanor explained her career change, her desire for a quieter life after years in Detroit's public library system. "I found the job listing online, interviewed over Zoom, and visited once to look at houses. The Victorian on Sycamore was within my budget, unlike anything I could afford in the city." "And you have no prior connections to Oakwood? No friends, family, former colleagues?" "None," Eleanor confirmed, then hesitated. "Well, except for Simon Parker, the high school principal who hired me. But we hadn't met before my interview." Morris made a note. "The house you purchased, do you know who lived there before you?" "An elderly couple, the Hendersons. They moved to Florida to be closer to their grandchildren. At least, that's what the realtor told me." Detective Morris nodded, her expression giving nothing away. "Ms. Winters, I need to be direct with you. Tyler Hayes' backpack appearing on your property after 6 years is not a coincidence. Either someone is trying to send a message by placing it there, or someone connected to his disappearance lives nearby." Eleanor finished quietly. "Yes, and until we figure out which, I'd recommend you stay with friends or family elsewhere." Eleanor smiled sadly. "I don't have anyone nearby. I came to Oakwood for a fresh start after my divorce." Morris considered this. "Then we'll have an officer station outside your house for the time being, and I'd like your permission to install temporary cameras on your property." As darkness fell over Oakwood that evening, 3 significant developments were underway. Forensic teams were processing the backpack for DNA and trace evidence. Detectives were re-interviewing Tyler's now-teenage friends about the mysterious meeting noted on the map, and Melissa Hayes was drafting a statement for press, her face alight with renewed determination. For the first time in years, the Hayes case was no longer cold. Chapter 5. Familiar strangers Melissa Hayes had imagined this moment countless times over 6 years, the moment when a break in Tyler's case would finally come. In her mind, it had always been accompanied by answers, by clarity. Instead, she found herself drowning in new questions. The day after the backpack's discovery, Oakwood Middle School's gymnasium hosted a hastily organized community meeting. The same space where Tyler had last been seen alive was now packed with townspeople, media representatives, and law enforcement officials. The backpack appears to have been stored in a dry location for most of the past 6 years, Detective Morris explained to the crowd. It was likely exposed to the elements only recently, perhaps in the last few weeks. This suggests it was deliberately preserved and then deliberately placed at Ms. Winter's residence. From her seat in the front row, Eleanor watched the community's reaction. As an outsider, she could sense the undercurrents, the old suspicions, the long-held theories, the unhealed wounds. People shot glances at each other, at Melissa Hayes, and frequently back at Eleanor herself, the stranger unwittingly thrust into their town's darkest mystery. After the meeting, Eleanor was approached by a man in his early 50s, his once athletic frame now softened, his face bearing the weathered look of prolonged grief. Mark Hayes. He introduced himself, extending his hand. Tyler's father. Eleanor Winters, she replied, shaking his hand. I'm so sorry about your son. I wanted to apologize for the disruption to your life, he said, his voice carrying the rasp of someone who had shouted himself hoarse many times over the years. And to thank you for handling the situation as you have. Some people might have just thrown the backpack away, thinking it was trash. Before Eleanor could respond, Melissa appeared at Mark's side, her gaze sharp and assessing as she looked at Eleanor. Have we met before? Melissa asked abruptly. You seem familiar somehow. Eleanor shook her head. No, I'm certain we haven't. I only moved to Oakwood recently. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded and turned to Mark. We should go. The detectives want to re-interview us separately about the map they found. As the former couple walked away, Eleanor couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling of being scrutinized. She made her way through the crowd toward the exit, noticing how conversations hushed as she passed. Outside, she was surprised to find Detective Morris waiting for her. I'll walk you to your car, the detective offered. People are emotional right now. Some might have questions you're not equipped to answer. As they walked, Morris shared a development she hadn't mentioned during the meeting. We've identified partial fingerprints on the backpack that don't belong to Tyler or any of his family members. We're running them through databases now. Do you think they'll match someone local? Eleanor asked. That's what concerns me, Morris admitted. In cases like this, perpetrators often remain connected to the investigation, sometimes even inserting themselves into it. They attend vigils, follow news updates, move within community undetected. You think whoever took Tyler never left Oakwood? Eleanor realized with chill. I think they've been here all along. And now, for some reason, they've chosen your porch to break their silence. Later that evening, as Eleanor tried to focus on preparing lesson plans for the coming week, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a teenage boy, perhaps 17 or 18, shifting nervously on her porch. Ms. Winters? I'm Jake Donovan. He introduced himself when she opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. I was Tyler Hayes' friend, one of the last people to see him that day. Eleanor recognized the name from news reports. The police probably want to talk to you, she said cautiously. They already have, many times. His voice cracked slightly. But there's something I never told them. Something about that map they found in Tyler's backpack. And I don't know who to trust anymore. Chapter 6. Buried Truth's Jake Donovan sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, a cup of untouched hot chocolate before him, his fingers nervously tracing patterns on the ceramic mug. Eleanor had called Detective Morris immediately, who was now en route, but the boy had been adamant about speaking with Eleanor first. You're the only neutral person in this whole situation, he'd explained. Everyone else has spent years believing their own version of what happened. Now, gathering his courage, he began his story. That day after basketball practice, Tyler told Chris and me that he was meeting someone in Pinewood Park. He seemed excited but secretive. We teased him about having a girlfriend, but he just smiled and said it was family stuff that he'd tell us about later. Jake paused, swallowing hard. We left him at school and headed home. I didn't think anything of it until he disappeared, and the police started questioning everyone. I told them Tyler, and I went separate ways after practice, which was true, but I left out that he'd mentioned meeting someone. Why? Eleanor asked gently. Because of who I thought he was meeting. Jake looked up, his eyes haunted. A few days earlier, I'd overheard Tyler on the phone with someone. He called them Dad, but it didn't sound like Mr. Hayes. He said something like, "I can't wait to finally meet you in person." Eleanor inhaled sharply. You thought he was meeting his biological father? Jake nodded. Tyler was adopted as a baby. Everyone knew that. He looked nothing like the Hayeses, but he'd never seemed interested in his birth parents before. Then suddenly he was making secret calls and being mysterious. Did you tell anyone about this? Mrs. Hayes? Your parents? No. After Tyler disappeared, I convinced myself I was wrong, that I'd misunderstood. The police were treating it as an abduction by a stranger, and that seemed to make more sense than... His voice trailed off. Than his own biological father being involved. Eleanor finished for him. Yeah, and Tyler was my best friend. I couldn't bear the thought that I might have prevented whatever happened by just speaking up. Tears welled in his eyes. But then yesterday, when they found his backpack with that map, it was exactly where I heard him arranging to meet someone. I can't stay silent anymore. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway signaled Detective Morris's arrival, before Jake could say anything more. The detective was at the door, her expression a mixture of concern and controlled urgency. After listening to Jake's story, Morris's first call was to the station to pull the Hayes adoption records. Information they'd reviewed before, but without the specific context. Tyler was adopted through a private agency that closed in 2010. Morris explained after the call. The records showed his birth mother was a teenager who requested a closed adoption. The birth father was listed as unknown on the paperwork. So, how would Tyler have contacted him? Eleanor asked. That's what we need to find out. Morris turned to Jake. Did Tyler ever mention names? Or how he discovered this person's identity? Jake shook his head. No, but he was on his laptop a lot in the weeks before. And he borrowed my phone once to make a call when his battery died. I remember because he cleared the call history afterward, which seemed weird. As the interview continued, Eleanor excused herself to let Baxter outside, standing on her back porch, watching her dog explore the yard in the growing darkness. She felt a strange prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Scanning the tree line that bordered her property, she saw nothing unusual, yet the feeling persisted. She called Baxter back quickly and returned inside, making sure all doors and windows were locked. When she returned to the kitchen, Detective Morris was preparing to take Jake home. We'll be increasing patrols around your house tonight, Morris told Eleanor. And tomorrow, we're bringing in Melissa and Mark Hayes to discuss this new information. We'll need to delve into the adoption angle more thoroughly. After they left, Eleanor tried to settle in for the night, but sleep eluded her. Around midnight, she went downstairs for a glass of water and noticed Baxter standing alert at the front window, his ears perked, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Peering cautiously through the curtains, Eleanor saw nothing at first. Then, as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she spotted a figure standing at the edge of her property, partially concealed by a large oak tree. The figure remained motionless, watching the house. Eleanor backed away from the window and called Detective Morris's cell number, which the detective had given her for emergencies. As she waited for an answer, a notification lit up her phone screen, an email from an address she didn't recognize. You have something that belongs to me. I have someone who belongs to you. Let's trade. The message was accompanied by a photo that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Tyler Hayes, no longer a 12-year-old boy but a young man of 18, holding today's newspaper, his eyes reflecting a mix of fear and resignation. Boy vanished after walking home. 6 years later, his backpack appears on a stranger's porch. Chapter 7. The connection. Eleanor sat in Detective Morris's office, her hands trembling as she passed the phone across the desk. The detective studied the email and the photo of Tyler, her face a mask of professional control. Despite the shock Eleanor knew she must be feeling. He's alive, Morris said quietly, almost to herself. After all this time. The station had erupted into controlled chaos. Cyber specialists were tracing the email, patrol cars were dispatched to Eleanor's house, and a team was assembled to notify the Hayes family. Through it all, one question remained unanswered. What did Eleanor have to do with any of this? The message mentions a trade, Morris said, reading the email again. You have something that belongs to me. The backpack was left on your porch, but it's now in police custody. And I have someone who belongs to you. That makes no sense. You've told us you don't have family in the area. Eleanor shook her head, as confused as everyone else. I don't know anyone here except my colleagues at the high school. I have no connection to Tyler Hayes or his family. There must be something we're missing, Morris insisted, rubbing her temples. People don't choose random targets for something this significant. A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Reynolds entered, carrying a file. Detective, we pulled Ms. Winters' background check from when she applied for a position at the high school. There's something you should see. Morris took the file, scanning its contents. Her expression changed subtly as she read, and she looked up at Eleanor with new understanding. Your maiden name was Bishop, she said. Eleanor nodded. Yes. I reverted to it after my divorce last year. Why? According to Tyler's adoption records, his birth mother's name was Kathleen Bishop. She was 17 when she gave him up, lived in Detroit. Morris watched Eleanor carefully. Any relation? Eleanor froze, her mind racing through family connections. Kathleen, my cousin. We called her Katie. She was much younger than me, almost like a niece. She got pregnant in high school and disappeared for several months. The family said she was doing an exchange program, but I always suspected. Her voice trailed off as the implications hit her. Oh my God, Tyler Hayes is Katie's son, which would make you his biological mother's cousin, Morris confirmed. Did you ever discuss this with Kathleen? No, it was a family secret no one talked about. Katie moved to California years ago. We lost touch. Eleanor's voice shook, but I never knew the baby was a boy or that he was placed in Michigan. I assumed he was adopted somewhere far away. The adoption was handled privately, through a lawyer with questionable practices who later lost his license, Morris explained. And the birth father, was he ever mentioned? Eleanor thought back nearly 2 decades. Only that he was older, someone Katie met while working a summer job. I think his name was Daniel or David, something with A.D. The door burst open and another officer entered. Detective, we traced the email. It was sent from a coffee shop's public Wi-Fi in Lakeside, about 20 miles north, and we got a hit on the fingerprint from the backpack. Daniel Keene, 48, arrested for fraud in 2010, but charges were dropped. Last known address is a cabin on Lake Superior. Morris immediately stood. That's only an hour from here. Get a tactical team ready. She turned to Eleanor. Daniel Keene must be Tyler's biological father. He somehow discovered your connection to Kathleen Bishop and your move to Oakwood. That's why he chose your porch. But what does he want from me? Eleanor asked, bewildered. Morris's phone rang before she could answer. After a brief conversation, her expression darkened. That was a patrol at your house. There's been a break-in. Your dog is missing. Eleanor covered her mouth in horror. Baxter, the email, I have someone who belongs to you. He has my dog. And now we know what he wants to trade, Morris said grimly. The backpack for your dog, and possibly information about Kathleen Bishop's whereabouts. As law enforcement mobilized for what could be the final chapter in Tyler Hayes' long cold case, Eleanor realized with a chill that she had unknowingly been connected to this story all along, a story that began before Tyler was even born. Chapter 8. Revelations and Reunion. The cabin sat on a wooded lot overlooking Lake Superior, isolated enough that the nearest neighbor was over a mile away. Detective Morris coordinated from the command post as tactical officers surrounded the property, moving silently through the trees. Eleanor waited in a police SUV parked a safe distance away, against Morris's better judgment. But she had insisted. If this confrontation involved her family history, she wanted to be present. Through binoculars, she could see the cabin was well maintained, with a newer model truck parked outside. Nothing about it suggested it was a hideout of someone who had held a person captive for 6 years. The raid happened swiftly. Officers breached the cabin from multiple entry points, shouting commands. Within minutes, Morris received word through a radio. Suspect in custody. One young male present. Appears to be Tyler Hayes. Also one dog, unharmed. Eleanor exhaled shakily, tears of relief filling her eyes. Later, as medical personnel evaluated Tyler at Oakwood Memorial Hospital, the full story emerged through a statement and Daniel Keene's subsequent confession. Daniel had never known about Tyler's existence until a boy reached out to him 6 years ago. Tyler had discovered his adoption papers while searching for Christmas presents in his parents' closet. Curious about his origins, he had used internet searches and social media to track down his birth father. He messaged me saying he was my son. Daniel explained during his interrogation. I was shocked. I never knew Kathleen was pregnant. We'd had a summer fling when she was in high school, and I was working construction. Her family made her break it off. Their initial communications had been harmless, just a curious boy asking questions about his biological father. But Daniel, recently released from prison for fraud and struggling with mental health issues, had convinced himself that Tyler was unhappy with his adoptive family and wanted to live with him instead. I suggested we meet in the park that day, just to talk, Daniel continued. But when he showed up and I told him who I was, he got scared, said he'd changed his mind and wanted to go home. I panicked, thought I'd lose him forever. I just wanted to explain, to have a chance to know my son. What started as a misguided attempt to connect had spiraled into kidnapping. Daniel had taken Tyler to the remote cabin, initially telling him it was just for a few days until they got to know each other. Days became weeks, then months, then years. Stockholm Syndrome and isolation did the rest. I never hurt him, Daniel insisted, though the psychological damage was apparent. I homeschooled him, taught him everything I know. We lived like father and son. Tyler's version was more complex. He described years of confusion and fear that gradually transformed into a strange codependent relationship. Daniel had monitored him constantly at first, but as Tyler grew older and bigger, the physical restraints had been replaced by psychological ones. Threats against his adoptive family if he tried to leave, combined with twisted affection and occasional kindness. I knew what he did was wrong, Tyler told the counselor assigned to his case. But after a while, it became normal. He was the only person in my world. And he kept saying that my real mom, Melissa, didn't want me anyway, that I was adopted because she couldn't have kids of her own. The backpack had been preserved by Daniel as a trophy of sorts. His decision to leave at Eleanor's house came after he discovered through social media that Kathleen Bishop's cousin had moved to Oakwood. I want to know about Kathleen, he admitted. Eleanor was my connection to her. I thought maybe we could make a fresh start, Tyler, me, and his birth mother. One big, happy family. The delusion in his thinking was evident to everyone. 3 days after Tyler's rescue, Eleanor sat in the hospital cafeteria across from Melissa Hayes. The woman who had spent 6 years searching for her son looked simultaneously exhausted and revitalized. He's starting to remember more about his life before, Melissa said, stirring her untouched coffee. The doctors say it will take time, but with therapy and patience, he can recover. And Mark, Eleanor asked gently, he's been here every day. We're taking it one step at a time as a family. Melissa managed a small smile. Tyler asked about you. He wants to thank you for Baxter. Apparently, your dog refused to leave his side once they were at the cabin together. Eleanor smiled. Baxter's always been a good judge of character. Have you spoken with your cousin? Kathleen. Eleanor nodded. Yes, finally. She was shocked to learn what happened. She's flying in tomorrow to meet Tyler, if he's ready. The two women sat in companionable silence for a moment, connected by circumstances neither could have imagined. Detective Morris mentioned that you're looking for a place to stay, since your house is still being processed as a crime scene. Melissa said suddenly, we have a guest room. It's not much, but thank you, Eleanor said, genuinely touched. I'd like that. 1 week later, the Oakwood community gathered once again in the middle school gymnasium, this time for a homecoming rather than a search party. Tyler Hayes, thin and quiet but undeniably alive, stood between his parents as neighbors and friends welcomed him back with tearful embraces and gentle words. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, Baxter at her feet and her cousin Kathleen beside her. The family reunions, both Tyler's return to his adoptive parents and his first meeting with his birth mother, had been private, emotional affairs. Now the healing could begin in earnest. Daniel Keene would face justice for his crimes, but that was a separate chapter in the story. Today was about celebration, about a boy who had vanished and a young man who had returned. As the event wound down, Tyler approached Eleanor, his movement still hesitant in large crowds. "Ms. Winters," he said softly, "Mom said you're staying with us for a while." "Just until I can move back home," she confirmed. "I hope that's okay with you." He nodded, then glanced down at Baxter, who was wagging his tail enthusiastically. "He helped me remember what it felt like to not be alone," Tyler said, crouching to pet the dog. "When Daniel brought him to the cabin, it was the first time in years I had someone else to care about." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "Sometimes the connections we need find us in the most unexpected ways," she said. Tyler looked up at her, then at Kathleen standing nearby, then back to his adoptive parents across the room. "Yeah," he agreed, a glimmer of his 12-year-old self visible beneath the trauma and years. "I'm starting to see that." As they walked together toward Melissa and Mark, Eleanor reflected on the strange, painful journey that had brought them all to this point. A backpack on a porch, a dog who made no sound in the night, a family secret buried for decades, and somehow, against all odds, a boy found his way home. Tyler Hayes vanished on a walk home that should have taken 20 minutes. To this day, no one knows what happened along those 8 ordinary blocks. If this case struck you, click like. It helps more people hear these stories and stay vigilant. And tell us in the comments, what do you think happened to Tyler? We read every comment, and your theories could help keep this case from fading away. At Gone Cold, we bring you new unsolved cases every week. See you in the next video.